What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video, and in this video we're going to continue our odyssey into exploring the new features of the KSP 1.9 update. Now, last episode we went to the brand spanking new Dres Canyon. Of course, Dres was not the only place that got a revamp with this update. Mohole also received a similarly stunning facelift, so that's what we're going to be doing in this video. And much like last week's video where we visited the Dres Canyon, which is an incredibly cool place to visit, we're going to be, of course, visiting the Mohole, which is a equally cool, if not even cooler place to visit in the Kerbin system, because it wouldn't be a trip to Mohole without visiting the Mohole as well. And, you know, it gives us a good opportunity to see if the Mohole itself has had a nice revamp to its appearance. So we're going to have to properly explore the planet fully. So I'm building two landers. You can see I've kind of built one, and now we're building the second one around it. That little lander is going to lower one Kerbal all the way down to the very bottom of the Mohole spike. Unfortunately, the terrain at the bottom of the Mohole is quite glitchy. The sides of the Mohole itself are very, very steep once you get all the way down to the bottom of it. It's just very, very hard to get a proper size lander down that deep. I did try experimenting with a lander design that would be kind of this form factor that could get two Kerbals all the way down to the base of the Mohole. It would involve having a 4 pistons from the Breaking Ground DLC that would extend out and give it these big wide arms that would allow it to basically just hang, to sort of suspend itself above the base of the crater, much like the Mohole base I made all the way back in 2017. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, the Kraken didn't like it again. It just glitched out whenever it sort of tapped the walls of the Mohole that deep. It would just start violently spinning. It just didn't work all that well. So I like this idea still. I think it's pretty good. So we're going to have this big lander will land on the very edge of the Mohole crater. Valentina Kerman will then exit, get on board the little lander, and then descend the bowels of the Mohole, do some science at the bottom, and then rocket all the way back up to the top of the crater, at which point that lander will run out of fuel and she can just re-embark this lander. Meanwhile, Bob Kerman, I believe, will be the one deploying all of the science units on the surface of Mohole, on the surface of Mohole that isn't in the Mohole, so all of the deployable science from the Breaking Ground DLC, as well as, you know, running the science experiments that come with the stock game. So, you know, the Science Junior, your Mystery Goo, your Barometer, all that good stuff. That's the outline for this mission, and that's kind of some of the reasoning behind the lander design that I ended up going with. It's a very similar sort of setup to the lander I used for the Mohole Blunderbirds mission, in which we had to go rescue Jebediah Kerman from the base of the Mohole without EVA fuel or anything like that. I used a similarly small lander just because that kind of lander size is the only thing that can get down to the very bottom of the Mohole without risking, you know, total destruction from the Kraken. But it's not completely immune to it. When I was doing some tests, the lander would sometimes glitch out and get stuck when it's that deep inside the Mohole and get destroyed. That's another advantage of having a separate lander that sits on the edge of the Mohole crater. If Valentina Kerman's ship gets destroyed and she is left stranded at the base of the Mohole, she will actually have enough fuel in her EVA pack to get all the way out of the Mohole again and back to the surface of Mohole. However, she won't have any fuel left to do any kind of meaningful ascent back into orbit and meet the mothership again. But, you know, if there is a lander just on the edge of the crater, she can just waddle her way over to that. I made sure there was adequate ladder access to the lander in case, you know, she had 0 fuel left and couldn't even EVA up to the cockpit. That's kind of another reason why I wanted the safeguard of having a separate lander that wouldn't actually be going down to the bottom of the Mohole itself and putting its crew at serious risk of needing to cool the Blunderbirds. Now we're constructing the rest of the ship. Just to talk briefly about the command module, I've included the hitchhiker storage module, which is kind of overkill. You know, we don't really need this many seats on board our mothership, but I do like to have that realistic layer of having a ship that has lots and lots of room to support a crew for long distances. Doesn't have a gravity ring. That's one thing I think I could try and incorporate into my interplanetary vessels. So far, I've never come up with a design, though, that I like the look of. Like, I've made gravity rings before, but they're always a little bit unrealistic in that Kerbals will have to transfer through heat shields, and when I design my rockets, I don't like them transferring through heat shields because I think it's a bit unrealistic. I like to make sure that when there are crew modules on these long distance ships, a Kerbal could believably, realistically just do an internal crew transfer between the modules. And that's kind of why we've got this setup here with the lander on top. Very, very unsafe in that, there's no launch escape system. But hey, we have the revert flight function, which is actually part of the KSP canon. If my Green Harvest film is to be considered canon, I did kind of explain how Kerbals are actually able to revert flights in universe. So there we go. We don't need a launch escape system. We do need the rest of the rocket, though. What a transition. That's what I'm building here. Just basically a gigantic booster in the form of the Making History parts with, is that 6 or 7? Whatever. Saturn V engines on the bottom, complemented by 2 of the massive Clydesdale boosters that came with the More Boosters update not too long ago. And, I haven't really given them much use when these boosters when they were first added. I made a space shuttle just to show them off and then haven't used them since, because I guess, there are always better options. Like if you were to strap 2 liquid fuel boosters to the sides of the rocket and have them use crossfeed to keep the central core fully fueled, that would be a much more efficient way of flying, hence why that's what I normally do. But sometimes it's nice to build a rocket that's a little bit more realistic, I say. As the payload above it is quite ludicrous, but the actual rocket itself is fairly, reminiscent of the SLS in that it's kind of Saturn V tech, even though it's not the SLS, it's more shuttle tech. But it's a big rocket complemented by 2 big SRBs. We'll leave it at that. As you can see, they're working well as we get well underway with the launch itself. Kind of a long payload fairing, but other than that, I think it does look somewhat reminiscent of the planned SLS rocket. Whether or not that rocket ever actually becomes a thing, we await with bated breath. But for right now, at least it's a thing in this video. My gravity turn is nothing really too special. It's just a standard ascent profile. It kept on wanting to default to the control point of the little lander inside the cargo bay of the bigger lander, which meant that our control point was off to the side. So I set an action group to the number 1 and just the stage button that would just reset our control point to the main command pod of the ship, just in case the control point got messed up, but luckily it never did. I think it's just because that's what I started with. I started the build with the Mohole diver, and as a consequence of that, it kind of wanted to always default to that command module, like the probe core on that, as the control point of the whole vessel, which is not ideal. Yeah, we've pretty much nearly finished our ascent, actually. I'm not using any of the new, well, I say new engines. I mean, the engines that were reskinned were the skipper and mainsail engines. They do not make an appearance in this video, unfortunately. But hey, if you want to check those out, why not check out last week's video? Yes, I am cross-promoting my videos. I feel like I should do that more often. So there we are. And then we're getting back into the actual fuel tank for this stage, in case you just skipped ahead or skipped through the build or just didn't notice. The fuel tank of this stage is inside the fairing. I probably should think about what I'm going to say before I say it, but that's not really my sort of style. And to be honest, I am sort of trying to rush through this commentary somewhat. A, because it's a Friday night and I want to go and live my life, but also this is like, I don't even know how many takes I've done of this commentary, because Sony Vegas is just dying on me quite a lot. It just keeps on saying Sony Vegas has encountered an error and needs, that thing that happens in Windows sometimes when it says, do you want to send the error report? You press send or do not send, and I always press do not send. It was that kind of error, so it just immediately just dies. It doesn't have a chance to autosave or anything, and that's happened at least 4 or 5 times now. So I am like, I've tried tweaking some of the settings. I've restarted the computer, and now it seems to be working. So hopefully, touch wood, it'll survive. I mean, if you guys are hearing me say this, then it worked. If you're not hearing me say this, then you will know it didn't work, which I know it doesn't make any sense, but neither does the error message. Why was it happening? I guess we'll never know. I mean, everything's fine. It's almost a brand new PC. Like, I built it not that long ago, and everything is well spec'd. It's got a 3950X, a good graphics card, 64 gigabytes of RAM. It's a good computer for editing. So I'm not quite sure why that error was happening, but it does seem to have. I've been talking now for quite some time, and the program hasn't died. So hopefully this is it now. Speaking of things dying, I decided let's try and recover this booster just here, and it all went well. I put lots of parachutes and made sure it touched down in the water so that it would have a nice soft landing. And despite all these efforts, the engine, which I would have thought would be the most expensive component of this stage, still died. So Oof, never mind. That was a shame. That was a shame. Doesn't matter. We'll get to the actual main part of this mission now, which is, I guess, actually just the journey to Mohole. So we're going to split our burn to Mohole over 2 burns, just because doing a burn of this magnitude with a ship with thrust-to-weight ratio this low, it would take us too long to execute the burn for it to be kind of efficient, and we'd spend so long burning, there's a pretty good chance we'd end up forcing our Kerbin periapsis to be well within its sphere of influence. And in fact, I think you can see here me creating the burn initially just to see if we can get a Mohole encounter, which we pretty much can actually. I got pretty lucky here. You can see it's a absolutely gigantic burn. We'd probably have to start pretty much pointing radial in terms of where we would start that burn on our orbit, so it's just not feasible for a rocket with thrust-weight ratio this low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create our Mohole encounter, or kind of create the maneuver node that I would do if our thrust-weight ratio value was like much better, and then we can just drag on retrograde and make it so the orbit is within Kerbin's sphere of influence, so that we can orbit around, and then we get another chance to do a second burn. But this time we'll have basically cut out about a kilometer of, you know, delta V change. Delta V change? That's kind of a redundant thing to say, isn't it? A kilometer of velocity change needed to get our Mohole encounter. I'm also not going to worry about doing our inclination change just yet. We'll just do that en route. That would take about another sort of 700, 800 meters per second of fuel. But like, as you can see, we have an absolutely huge amount of delta V here. The in-game readout is a little bit misleading because it's only showing the first stage of the nuclear part of the ship. You can see it's kind of got 2 halves to it. One part is a fuel tank that can detach halfway through the mission, and the rest is just solid. So there is a lot of delta V that isn't being shown in the in-game readout, and unfortunately Kerbal Engineer Redux has not yet updated to the latest version of KSP, at least when I tried getting it working. But you know, so that's why the delta V readout might look a little bit on the low side. The reason why I've not got any more stages for the nuclear stage, and, you know, thus giving us even more delta V, is because I don't like leaving debris stuck in orbit and, you know, harming all of the wildlife up here. So I'm going to decouple that stage once we have our Mohole encounter and once our orbit is on a collision course with Mohole. We'll then detach that stage and let it crash into the surface of Mohole, thus ensuring we don't leave any debris stuck in space. I probably could have done a few stages like this and just deployed it at various stages in the mission, such that it would always be, you know, on a collision course with the planet, but it was just more effort than it was really worth, to be honest. I only fancied doing it once. So we've now got our second burn all planned out. Nothing more to do really other than just time warp down and execute it. So I'm once again using the advanced burn time indicator setting, which is in, you know, the settings of Kerbal Space Program. Probably didn't need that additional piece of information, did it? It's a great little addition to the game. Not sure when it was added. One of my Discord server members messaged me to let me know about it, so thank you so much for that. I've forgotten your name now and I've closed the conversation, but you know who you are. It's a great tool. I recommend everyone use it. It basically tells you when to start your burn and be maximally efficient throughout it. As you may be aware, I haven't really talked too much about the actual methodology of getting to Mohole, just because that's not really what this mission is about. It's mainly to show off the... First of all, look at that. Wow. Isn't Kerbin beautiful? Of course, Kerbin is the other thing that got a nice... I think they actually upgraded... Did they upgrade the graphics again for Kerbin in 1.9? I swear it didn't look this good in 1.8. Although I'm not using graphics mods now, which probably had some bearing on the planet's surface. Because one thing that does need addressing is there is a lack of clouds here, and water still looks terrible. So hopefully at one point maybe this can go... Anyway, what am I talking... I've got on a bit of a tangent. I was saying that this mission is not really here to tell you how to get to Mohole. I would point you to my Lowne Aerospace 2, the second one series, which is basically a series of tutorials. And there is a video on, you know, how to get to Mohole. So I would just point you towards that if you want to know exactly how to get there. Here you can see me executing the inclination change. You want to do that as close to your apoapsis as possible. The higher in your orbit you are, the cheaper inclination changes are. It's kind of the opposite to what retrograde and prograde burns would be. So you want to do your inclination change high up if you can. If you want to just, you know, save on the old fuel. Now what I just did there was I wanted to just double check. I thought, hang on, that ladder on the lander is quite close to the door. I want to make sure the door actually works and not just discover once we're on the surface of Mohole that it's actually being blocked. So I did a quick EVA with one of the Kerbals just to make sure he could use that door, and he could. Happy days. So we can continue on, and we did the inclination change maneuver node burn a second ago. Now we're at that point. We can start the burn itself, and as you can see, our Burn time indicator has got a bit of a red bar there, which indicates that we're going to run out of fuel. But of course, like I said earlier, the game is not quite understanding my setup. I don't know if it's because I'm using the fuel lines, or if because the the decoupler doesn't have cross feed enabled. I'm not quite sure. But the game then suddenly says you've run out of fuel, and that's why the bar turned red, even though it's just that stage. So at least we know now that we can dump that stage when we can. I don't want to do it right now because, of course, it will just be left in space forever, which is not a good place to leave it. So I want to make sure it's actually going to get destroyed and not left to roam the stars for all eternity. So the first thing I'm going to do is get myself on a Mohole collision course. I kind of messed up a bit because I forgot to disable the force percent on the decoupler. Well, that's a bad choice of words. I forgot to set the force percent to 0 on the decoupler. So when I actually detach that stage, if I were to decouple it right now, it would actually raise its orbit and not impact Mohole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise our orbit a little bit, and then we'll decouple the tank, and that will in the opposite direction. So then that will basically put its orbit on what we are currently on, and thus be destroyed when it enters Mohole's sphere of influence and ultimately Mohole's surface. So we're going to quickly raise our orbit, deploy the fuel tank in the opposite direction, and as you can see, if we just cut to it, I think I've got debris disabled in the map screen. We can just enable it. There we go, or switch to it, and there we go. What a great piece of video right there. So as you can see, we're on a collision course. You may have noticed that that stage actually has some SRBs attached to it, just because at the time when I was designing the ship, I wasn't quite sure at what point in the mission I would be decoupling that tank. So I wasn't quite sure if I would be close to a collision course, and perhaps the SRBs on board would have enough delta V to put it on a collision course if the ship it was detaching from wasn't actually on a collision course itself. Like if we were detaching it whilst we were in Moho's sphere of influence, we wouldn't be able to it would be much cheaper to just let it deorbit itself rather than put ourselves on a collision course before changing our inclination again. I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but just at some point in the mission, I wasn't sure where we'd be detaching it, so I just wanted that, this safety net of having a little bit of delta V stored within that stage so we could deorbit it and make sure it actually impacted something and was destroyed. And of course, it is always very cool watching stages detach with the aid of solid rocket motors. And we can. I think what I did was I set it as a target so we can actually watch it impact Moho, and then I subsequently didn't point the camera at it. So you'll just have to trust me that it impacts Moho. I mean, maybe I just missed it. If you guys can see it at any point, let me know in the comments with a thing about the time code, or maybe you can hear it in the audio. I am recording this commentary with the audio muted because otherwise I just get very distracted by most things in life. So if I could just remove one layer of distraction in the form of the in-game audio, I'm going to remove it. So maybe you can hear a little like poof as it impacts. Who knows? Either way, you'll just trust me that it impacted it. I mean, you could see its collision course was there on the map screen as we entered Moho's sphere of influence. And speaking of Moho, moving on from that proverbial train wreck of a commentary, speaking of Moho, my goodness, it looks so beautiful. And as we get closer and closer and closer to its surface, I think you'll agree that it does look quite stunning. And of course, we're going into a polar orbit because the Moholes themselves are at the caps of the planet, and the poles of, I think, all the planets in Kerbal Space Program, come to think of it, are quite mountainous. I'm just trying to think, is there an exception to that rule? Possibly Elu. I don't know. I guess if, not just planets, I guess moons. So Minmus isn't that mountainous at its poles, I don't think. Although Minmus isn't very mountainous in general. But I think, as a general rule of thumb, if you want mountainous terrain, the poles are where you want to aim for. Like the Mun poles are very, very impressive places to visit, and quite a close place to visit. Like if you're kind of bored of your Mun and Minmus missions, but don't want to quite stretch to interplanetary just yet, the Mun poles are a really, really fun place to visit. I've actually done a video of visiting the Mun poles, if you'd be interested in that. I basically took 2 go-karts that were unpowered. They were basically like soapbox derby races, and we raced them down the slope of a Mun mountain. It was a really fun mission, and not many people watched it. So maybe that's something, maybe I'll put a link somewhere if I remember. But I probably won't. So, by the way, this was a fun thing that happened. The Kraken destroyed the ship. I decided to enable auto strut on the nuclear engines just here because they got a little bit wobbly during physical time warp. However, the footage you just saw was a Kraken attack. Didn't like it. Kraken doesn't like auto strut, so I do try and avoid it whenever I can. So that's kind of why I didn't use auto strut and why it sometimes does wobble about a bit. Thought it might be funny just to show you a little outtake and why I refuse to play this game without quick saves, because although I don't need quick saves, but there are just moments like that where the game will just do something or glitch out through absolutely no fault of your own for using a feature that's part of the game, like, oh, I just used auto strut because it's a feature in the game that's designed for strutting things, and that's what I needed in that moment, so I just used it. I feel like at that point it's not my fault that the game glitched out anyway and destroyed it. So I would always recommend playing with quick saves, even if you just have the rule that you won't use them unless a glitch occurs. Like, maybe that's when people say they want to play without quick saves, I would still urge them to have them enabled and just keep using the quick save button intermittently, but then set yourself that goal, that internal rule that you would only use the quick save function if a glitch eats your ship up. I don't play with that rule because I get very frustrated. And things like Eve missions, I just don't think I have the patience at all to do an Eve mission without quick saves, because I'm not the best pilot when it comes to Eve. It sometimes does take me a couple of attempts to get the ascent just right. And sometimes descents onto very precise locations, such as the Mohole, take a couple of attempts. Luckily, this time I don't think it did. I think I got the landing pretty much spot on the first time. Well, actually, I don't want to say that because it wasn't a very textbook landing on a specific site, so I couldn't quite find the Mohole, even though I can now see it. It's blindingly obvious. It's that sort of much more pale crater just on the left-hand side of the screen. There it is, I saw it, and I realized I wasn't really landing near it, so I killed it for my velocity and then tried to fly by eyeballing it, which is never a good idea, trying to figure out which way you're pointing by not using the nav ball. So I kind of just killed everything in terms of speed and then just pirouetted myself on the spot and did some little puffs with the engine to hop our way over and select a more appropriate landing site. So I wanted to get right up close to the crater just to give us a nice, impressive backdrop for our surface laboratory, which we're going to construct out of the breaking ground pieces. And of course, to get ourselves nice and close, we haven't got to do that much additional flying to get to the crater itself. I am landing the wrong way around. I wanted it so that we could just fire the Mohole diver itself straight out and into the Mohole, and it's currently facing the wrong way, so once we've touched down, which I guess is now, we'll do a quick sort of turn around on the spot just to get ourselves pointed in the correct orientation for a maximally efficient descent into the Mohole. Probably not the safest maneuver to do, but it was fine. Valentina, she knows her stuff. But she has no time to revel in the magnificent, graceful maneuver she just did, because now it is time to do what is probably the most exciting, if not the most stressful, part of the mission. And that is, of course, the actual descent into the Mohole itself. Now, just to pre-warn you, there are going to be 2 hard cuts during the descent, and that's because I was quick saving, and then I subsequently crashed and had to reload a quick save. The camera is incredibly glitchy. I believe the Moholes mark the exact pole of Moho, and the camera always wants to it always freaks out because it doesn't quite know which hemisphere you're on, I guess. So it always wants to spin around a lot when you're descending, and it's really, really difficult to control. And the nav ball often flips about as well, really randomly. So it is very, very difficult to land without quick saves. And a great update has been incorporated into 1.9, that when you're very, very close to the surface, you can't quick save when you're about to crash. But when you're descending through very deep structures, such as the Dres Canyon or the Mohole, it's not that helpful because you're not about to crash, you're descending. But look, it said it just there. I couldn't quick save here, even though we are pretty safe, because it says we're about to crash. So maybe that's something that needs addressing in an update or a patch. Probably the little you can't quick save when you're about to crash is probably a little bit too aggressive there, squad. I imagine it would get very annoying when trying to land space planes on Duna as well, because I like to quick save just before I hit the surface several times just to make sure I'm definitely going to get the landing. Even though I don't think I've ever actually had to reload a quick save from that close. So maybe these concerns are unfounded. You can see whilst I'm descending that I've got those cubic octagonal struts on the edges of the fuselage, just because when this thing kind of only has its bare fuel tanks, it gets wedged a lot more easily at the bottom, and it tends to start shaking itself apart because all those pieces are so close to the surface on all 4 sides, all of the sides. It became very, very shaky, and it became very, very not very good. Like, it would wedge itself and get stuck a lot more easily. So I added those struts there just to keep it clear of the very, very edges of the canyon. I was kind of winging it, as I was saying. I don't know if it was that obvious, but I hope that made sense nonetheless. And look at that. That was it. We've done it. We're now out of the Mohole, pretty much. I hope you enjoyed that. The Mohole, like I say, is one of the most impressive features of the game. Started out as an Easter egg, And I guess the developers did a big brain time move and decided to just declare it an Easter egg rather than fix it. And you know what? I'm glad they did, because it is one of the more interesting places to visit in the game. If not, well, albeit one of the weirder places to visit. And as you can see, we did not need to rely on the emergency solution of having Valentina's EVA pack ready to go in case our lander got stuck. It was able to safely get all the way out of the Mohole with lots of fuel to spare. I probably added a bit too much fuel into this thing, but like I said, I wanted to play it safe, So I have to do a little bit too much fuel than what I really needed. And that's it. That's the Mohole bit done. Now it's time to do all the rest, which is doing the science, which will yield us nothing because I'm playing on a sandbox mode. It's here for the symbolicness of it, and it's always fun to deploy the deployable ground units. You might have also noticed, you might have also caught me doing a surface sample at the bottom of the Mohole just to see if we'd get a different kind of text readout. We didn't. That was a shame. But, we did it nonetheless. And now you can see me doing the immensely satisfying thing of unfolding all of the ground science units. Look at that. Oh, isn't that great? Bob is looking elsewhere, I guess. He's so happy. He's among the stars. He's probably quite warm. He's very, very close to the sun. So why not break out some solar panels? See, in the Dres Canyon, we were very much not in direct sunlight ever. Only very, very infrequently, so I went with RTGs. This time, actually, it turns out we are also not in direct sunlight most of the time, but I did bring solar panels nonetheless, just because when we are in the sunlight, they'll be very, very efficient because we are so close to the sun. We've deployed the satellite dish, my favorite thing, and we'll deploy the seismometer as well because it's all cool. And then, of course, we need the actual experiment control hub to run everything, I guess, and that's the surface base done. So you can do a nice little shot of our two Kerbals there, standing amid their empire that they've built. Valentina doing the little salute thing right on time. And you actually see as they board the land, you can see the sun is behind a mountain, and it does stay there pretty much all of the time because of the fact we're on a pole. So the sun doesn't really rise and set as much as it would do on the equator. So that was a shame. But it's all just the symbolicness of it. Like I say, this is a sandbox save. It doesn't really matter. So now it's just a case of getting ourselves back to the mothership. I didn't really think about how I was going to ascend. I just decided to watch my orbit and adjust accordingly if I started going the wrong way, which I did. But I knew we had enough fuel to get to the ship with plenty of fuel to spare. And of course, I am comfortable with quick loading if I mess things up. But it turns out I didn't. We got a nice close encounter right off the bat, and it all went pretty well. I mean, don't be disheartened if you don't get dockings quite as... I probably make it look easy because I've done this so much, so I don't recommend emulating my style is what I'm trying to say. I would recommend doing things properly. I was just kind of bored. Like we've done the bulk of this mission. We are 28 minutes in pretty much. I want to try and get things wrapped up nice and quickly. So we're going to burn towards our target, execute that burn to get our encounter with it. I think we've got a 0 kilometer separation, which is always good. Now we've got a 0 kilometer separation at least. And then we can just point ourselves retrograde relative to our target on the nav ball and just coast our way over to it. And then once we get nice and close, we can activate that Poodle engine, which has very high TWR for what we are. So we should be able to kill off that speed pretty much immediately. And then we can perform our docking. And this time around, unlike last week's mission to Dres, we have a pilot on board the Mohole lander as well as the mothership itself. So we can do the certified Lowne lazy method of docking, where we just have both ships automatically hold targets to each other, and they will just remain in automatic alignment all the way through the docking process, thus making everything very, very easy. As long as you keep your speed low and not use non-physical time warp, it's dead easy. And this is how it's done. It's happening before your eyes. I'm just going to let the footage do the talking. I feel like I've done a very, very bare bones explanation of it. You can just see it happening here. But that's pretty much the bulk of the mission done. We're actually going to leave the lander attached for the journey back to Kerbin, just because, again, I like to keep things kind of realistic and give my Kerbals lots and lots of room to walk around and, live in for the long, long journey back home. But we can use the new fuel drain valve that came with 1.9 to get rid of all of the excess oxidizer that we, of course, don't need anymore, because now we're just going to be using nuclear engines, which only need liquid fuel. They don't need oxidizer. We can just get rid of that, get ourselves a admittedly very, very small amount of delta V gain, but delta V gain nonetheless, I'll take it. And then we can start planning our journey back to Kerbin. Now, as you can see, our particular orbit around Mohole means that no matter what we do, we're not going to get into a very high solar orbit because our orbit is currently perpendicular to the sun rather than, with Mohole's orbital direction. So we can't really get any kind of meaningful apoapsis height gains by burning at Mohole. But luckily, Mohole's sphere of influence and gravity is so small that the Earth effect really doesn't make that much difference. So I'm happy just to do a quick burn just to escape Mohole's sphere of influence. It's just a little bit easier to plan maneuver node burns when you're not having to faff around within the sphere of influence of another planet. Now, when it came to setting up the maneuver node, I couldn't quite get a very good Kerbin encounter, but if I when I pressed the skip orbit, so to the next orbit around the sun, I got a pretty darn close encounter with Kerbin. And of course, we're going to be using pretty much the remainder of our liquid fuel, which is fine because we have a massive heat shield attached to the command module, so we can re-enter Kerbin using only the power of aerobraking. So we can just do that burn there. And get ready for this mission to wrap up, which of course brings us to the main component of the video, and that is the Copper Compliance series, Matt's Whiskey Review. Today's Whiskey Review comes flying at us with the speed of a bullet, one might say. I might say, because today's Whiskey Review is Bullet Bourbon, which for the longest time, and when I say the longest time, I mean for my entire life that I've known about this whiskey until yesterday, I've always thought it was called Bullet Bourbon. So I've always called it Bullet Bourbon. And I believe it was Beth that then said, oh, look, it says Bullet. It's because I was showing her the bottle and she was like, ooh, Bullet Bourbon. And I zoomed in on it and I was like, oh my God, it does say Bullet. I've just been calling it Bullet Bourbon all these years. I guess because it's American and Americans love their guns, I guess, was maybe the connection. I have no idea why I can't read, but it doesn't matter because I've now established I've used the correct name of that whiskey for today's whiskey review. Bullet Bourbon. I can't say it with a straight face now. Bullet Bourbon is definitely one of my favorite cheaper whiskey, but not budget whiskeys. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little bit more expensive than, say, your Jack Daniel's Old No. 7, but it's so much smoother. It's far nice to sip, and it's far nice to drink neat as well. You can get it in rye kind, so Bullet Rye Bourbon, or, just normal Bullet Frontier Whiskey Bourbon. I don't like the rye kind as much, and this is a thing that I find with... I've tried a few different whiskies and then their rye equivalents to see if there is a tangible difference, and there is, and I always prefer the taste of the non-rye kind, so take that for what it's worth, if you will. But that is not a review of rye whiskies, this is a review of Bullet Bourbon. Bullet Bourbon, frontier whiskey, it has, sweet oak aromas with notes of pepper, spices, and vanilla that define its taste, according to the Amazon.co.uk description. But I have to agree wholeheartedly with the Amazon.co.uk description. It has a wonderful taste. Like I said, it's very smooth. You can sip it, and it's delicious. And I think, as far as bourbons go, it tastes a lot more similar to Scotch than others. Make no mistake, it tastes of bourbon. But I think if you're trying to transition from Scotch to bourbon, or vice versa, I suppose, Bullet Bourbon is kind of a good bridge. It definitely has that kind of smokier taste that Scotch has versus, I guess, the more sour taste of bourbon. I feel like that's not a good description of bourbon, which is not a great thing for me to say as a seasoned whiskey reviewer, allegedly. Don't read too much into it, copper person watching this video to grade it. It's great. I love Bullet Bourbon, It's great to sip. It comes with a cork, which is always nice. And like I say, it's definitely a step up from your Jack Daniel's Old No. 7, your Jameson's. I mean, Jameson's isn't bourbon actually, but you know what I mean? It's a really good, cheaper whiskey that isn't super cheap. I guess mid-range whiskey, but I wouldn't even call it mid-range. It's still budget. I would give Bullet Bourbon, moving on to the score. What have I scored things so far? Because I want to keep the scoring kind of in line. I would put it I would put it at the same rank as Maker's Mark, which I think I gave an 8 out of 10. So there we are, Bullet Bourbon. I'm going to actually go back through my videos now and I'm going to put a link. I might try and put a link in the description of all of my whiskey rankings, that I actually keep track of this. Now, it's actually like a thing that I'm doing. So there you go. Maybe on screen I'll put the ranks thus far. And then I'll try and put something in the description. Who knows? I've made a lot of promises about the description, and I keep forgetting what they were. So that was my review of Bullied Bourbon, and that, of course, was my review of the newly reskinned Mohole as well. That was the rest of this video, which, of course, like I say, was not the main focus of this video. Make no mistake, it's a whiskey review video. But, you know, Mohole looks stunning nonetheless. Keep them coming, squad. The texture updates are very, very welcomed. I very much look forward to KSP 1.20. I guess they could make it KSP 2.0 because then, you know, we've got KSP 2 coming out. Regardless, on the left-hand side is a video chosen for you by YouTube's recommendation algorithm. On the right-hand side is just the one. It's just my most recent upload. There's also a link to subscribe and check out Patreon on there if you'd like to. In the description, you'll find links to Discord, Twitter, merchandise, Instagram, all that good stuff. Guys, thank you for watching. Goodbye.